Minnesota tonight. Tune in, Minnesota tonight. Minnesota tonight. Tune in, Minnesota tonight. Tune in, Minnesota. Tune in, Minnesota tonight. Tune in, Minnesota tonight. Tonight. Minnesota tonight. Tonight. Minnesota tonight. Minnesota tonight. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Cody.
And I'm Lizzie, Gardner, and this is the state of Minnesota. A new bill introduced to Minnesota legislature would require all state police officers to take 4 hours of mental health crisis management training. When reached for comment, a therapist said, yeah, 4 hours, that should be good.
At 6:10 a.m. last Tuesday, tornado sirens mistakenly blared citywide, waking up and scaring many Minneapolis residents. A spokesperson for Hennepin County said, the sirens are tested daily, and a malfunction arose due to that daily testing. So wait, the test is to make sure the sirens go off, but the malfunction is that the sirens went off? That's not a news story, that's a riddle you give to a computer to make sure it's not sentient.
Last Tuesday celebrated Equal Pay Day in Minnesota, highlighting the statewide wage gap, which shows women are reported to make 81 cents for every dollar a man makes, explaining why my single mom tried so hard to convince me that a Zoom was just as good as an iPod.
Nickel Creek mandolinist Chris Thiele will take over as the new host of Prairie Home Companion once Garrison Keillor steps down in October. When asked about the timing of his retirement, Keillor said, it just didn't feel right to leave until all of my fans were dead.
Indeed Brewing, LSD, and that's lavender, sunflower honey, and dates LSD, was forced by feds to change its name after distribution across state lines began to make people question the ingredients due to the name. Good to see that reading comprehension is still tripping Wisconsin up.
Governor Dayton has asked the Department of Homeland Security to accept Minnesota IDs which don't meet real ID requirements at federal buildings and military bases, locations that need real IDs to gain access to. And guys, I did some digging. Holographic Charizards only work at federal buildings, and that's only if Kevin's working. A recent study shows that it costs about $1,000 more to send a 4-year-old to preschool in Minnesota than it does an 18-year-old to college. When reached for comment, a Starbucks junior barista said, yeah, my student loans are really getting out of control.
A woman was shot 4 times in her car by an unknown driver in front of the Walker Art Museum before transporting herself to Hennepin County Medical Center. When reached for comment, the woman said, yeah, I don't know, I still don't get performance art, but it's definitely gotten more interactive. The first turkey hunting season of the year opened last Wednesday, a season that brought a few changes in protocol. More hunting time will be allotted to each hunter, those time periods will be longer, and in a real curveball, the turkeys get guns too!
For the first time since 1919, the U.S. Postal Service has lowered their stamp prices from 49 to 47 cents. Hold your applause. I, for one, am very relieved I can finally afford to mail all my bills now.
Congratulations. A 17-year-old Columbia Heights boy is in critical condition after injuring himself while car surfing. And look, I know it's easy, you want to laugh, but car surfing is a gateway surf. Many white men who car surfed as teens go on to couch surfing, or even, God forbid, just regular surfing.
The city of St. Paul is predicting the new Minnesota United Soccer Stadium to bring a long-awaited economic renaissance to the city. One official was quoted as saying, you know what, Minneapolis might have their beer and their sports and their culture and their music and their food and their nightlife and their personality. If you want a low-scoring, slow-paced, most ignored sport that's only respected in Europe, we'll see you in St. Paul.
Stillwater High School girls hockey coach Tony Scheid stepped down last week after what he calls a series of unrelenting and vicious verbal attacks of an intensity unlike anything I've ever imagined. Wow. You know what they say about successful hockey organizations? Clear violations of personal boundaries, full-on relentless verbal abuse, can't lose! Minnesota forever!
NORML Foods announced plans to tweak the ingredients in a handful of their flagship products, including Spam. To calm supporters, the company spokesperson said, while changes are coming, Spam at its core will remain the same 3 ingredients: can, goop, and calories.
Best efforts. They're both still politicians.
A recent study conducted by the U of M on smartphone usage showed that emojis are confusing due to the fact that a single emoji can look slightly different when displayed across a number of different smartphone brands. One researcher was quoted saying, "It didn't help that many of the participants in the study hadn't seen a human face since 2008.
A new study shows that, on average, the richest 5% of men in the Twin Cities live 13 years longer than the poorest 5%, which, I mean, it makes sense because everybody knows that it takes at least 13 years to finish building your dream yacht.
Usually more. A woman who was attacked for speaking Swahili at a Coon Rapids Applebee's is on the forefront of trying to make hate crimes a felony in Minnesota. If I may speak to you directly, miss, between you and me, at the risk of sounding like one of your attackers, you should probably get the fuck out of Coon Rapids.
A physicians advocacy group has come out against Hennepin County Medical Center's usage of live sheet for medical tests and training. I'm all for this too, because you know what? It would actually allow sheep to get back to doing what they really, really are meant here to do. Advertising mattresses and being sexually harassed by the Welsh.
And finally, tonight's top story takes us to the North Shore. Last Friday, a man in Two Harbors, Minnesota was pulled over for going 171 miles an hour. Local police said they initially clocked the man at 171, then 168, then 143. And I don't know a lot about the law, but it can be a good sign if the cops are also keeping track of your second and third highest speeds.
The situation escalated when the police realized they had to drive 130 miles per hour themselves just to get the driver to notice their flashing lights. However, something tells me that a person driving 171 miles per hour in the first place isn't really the type to respond well to the word stop.
And in addition to that, a second cop car had to be brought in after the first cop realized they actually really liked driving 130 and then just sort of kept doing it.
After finally pulling the man over, the officers alerted him to how quickly he was driving, to which the driver replied that he knew that his speedometer was being weird and he would definitely get it looked at now.
At press time, unknown sources discovered and leaked a copy of the driver's license photo. Thanks a lot, guys. I'm Cody Nelson.
And I'm the Midwestern version of Jennifer Connelly.
Thank you.
Tune in tonight. Minnesota tonight. Minnesota tonight.
We'll take 10 to talk about marijuana. It's that thing you smoke to become president. Before we start the segment, we understand that you've had this conversation before, and believe me, it's not what you think. We know that you've been cornered by your patchouli-scented cousin Corey, who claims that dang Kush can cure every type of cancer, regrow an arm, and make a band called the String Cheese Incident tolerable. Now, personally, I never want to be involved in a string cheese incident, which I imagine is something horrible that has happened in a Kraft Foods laboratory. But tonight, we're not going to talk about weed itself, but rather the laws that surround it. Minnesota's laws waste resources and keep its most vulnerable residents in cycles of poverty and incarceration. And because Minnesota, unlike other states like Oregon or Colorado, marijuana is still illegal here. However, since 1976, Minnesota has decriminalized marijuana possession, meaning that when someone gets caught with a small amount of weed, they are not subject to jail time and instead receive a petty misdemeanor charge with a $200 fine. And while a $200 fine might make you miss out on a string cheese incident concert, Minnesota's punishment of tokers is nowhere near the harshest. Many other states still charge those with a small amount of marijuana with a misdemeanor, which can carry up to a year of jail time. One of those states is North Dakota, the Dakota for those of us who want to get away from the hustle and bustle of South Dakota. There, it is a misdemeanor to ingest any form of marijuana, even secondhand, meaning that they have effectively outlawed concerts, dance clubs, house parties, and any congregation of 5 or more cool people in a room, but luckily, none of those things has ever happened in North Dakota. In comparison, Minnesota's law may seem much more reasonable, but when you look at the numbers, our enforcement of marijuana laws is not as chill as it may seem. Essentially, Minnesota approaches marijuana the same way that your best friend says that you can date their ex. They say it's fine, they're definitely not okay with it, but it's fine. It's fine. I'm fine. No, really, I don't even know why you brought this up. I couldn't care less. It was like 3 years ago. Can we please move on from this? For example, in 2014, more than 11,000 people in Minnesota were charged with marijuana-related offenses. That's a big number, but it remains consistent with previous figures in 2012 and 2013, which is crazy. That's as if the entire workforce of the Mall of America got busted for weed every year, which would suck because it's impossible to work at the Mall of America sober. We all know that dancing SpongeBob is blazed out of its mind, and you would be too if you worked in a place where you're constantly surrounded by children on leashes and sunglass huts. Fun fact, 4 or more sunglass huts together are known as a sunglass village. Now, more than 60% of these marijuana offenses were for possession of small amounts of marijuana, which the state defines as anything under 42.5 grams. And if you forgot how much that is, it's about the weight of a Chinese striped hamster. Don't ask me how I know, I just do. And no, as we mentioned earlier, those charged with pot in Minnesota are fined a seemingly small $200, but if you're charged more than once or with any amount over a hamster's weight, things can get really expensive really fast. After being arrested, there are other fines added on, like a $120 court fee and a $75 court copay if you were arrested and need a public attorney. Then, depending on the court's ruling, you may be required to pay over $9,000 to attend a mandatory drug treatment, which can interfere with your work schedule. And on top of that, you might have your car confiscated by civil forfeiture. You see how expensive this got in a matter of seconds? That's like the state scooping scoop after scoop of guac, and you know guac is extra. And that's not even including the price of the outside ramifications one might face if charged, like the loss of public housing, or their job, or disqualifying them from some government programs like financial aid for college. This charge might stay on a person's permanent record unless they pay an extra expungement fee of $324. If they don't pay for the expungement fee, your record will be there for potential employers to search and possibly jeopardize your chance of getting hired. A problem that won't go away unless you pay the right amount of money? What is this, Godfather 2 or Goodfellas or really any sad Ray Liotta star vehicle? For a hamster's weight in pot, you can lose nearly $10,000. Meanwhile, in the city of Denver, that same amount of pot costs $250, and you can smoke that with the mayor. They actually ask you to. Here's $200 to smoke it with me. And let's just say you didn't have enough money to pay that fine. According to Minnesota state law, you would then be guilty of a misdemeanor where you could then serve a maximum of 90 days in jail and pay an additional $1,000 in fines. Remember, this is all in a state where weed possession is decriminalized, because nothing says decriminalized like spending 3 months in prison. Many would argue that these expensive penalties deter people from smoking marijuana, but the fact is that Adult Swim still exists, so we know that's not true. I mean, estimates from the Minnesota Department of Health show that 1 in 8 Minnesota adults have used marijuana in the last year, and nearly half have tried marijuana at least one in their lifetime. So clearly, people are not abstaining from weed in Minnesota because of the consequence of the law, which either says how ineffective these fines are or how effective reggae is. Especially if you are a white person.
In 2010, the American Civil Liberties Union conducted a study that found black citizens were nearly 8 times more likely than whites to be arrested for marijuana possession.
That's horrible. Look, the only thing that black people should be 8 times more likely to get are awkward fist bumps from white people. This number makes Minnesota the state with the second worst disparity in enforcement of marijuana laws, trailing only Iowa. It's very telling that Minnesota is nearly as prejudiced at enforcing its marijuana laws as a state where the only black resident is a guy whose car broke down. This means that black people, and specifically young black men in Minnesota, are having their futures dashed simply because they are doing precisely what young white men are doing. And we are spending a lot of money to keep this going. In 2010 alone, Minnesota spent $42 million enforcing marijuana prohibition, a staggering amount. That means it costs over $3,000 per marijuana offender to enforce a law that just doesn't work. Basically, Minnesota is like Wile E. Coyote. We know how this ends, but here we are still buying anvils and expecting a different outcome. This is surprising because many law enforcement officials themselves are aware that this is not helpful. Even the former police chief of Minneapolis, Anthony Bauza, said in 2012 that making marijuana arrests a priority is a waste of police resources and does not reduce street violence. Which is not surprising because although marijuana laws have not changed in the last 40 years, Minnesota's crime rates are at their lowest level since the 60s. This is a Reagan-era legislation holdover from when people thought smoking pot will make you kill your parents and everyone's brain was an egg. Think of Minnesota like a computer. It's worked a certain way since its invention, but the necessary hardware should change as the functions do, but haven't. The state is paying millions of dollars every year to continually shove a floppy disk into a USB drive. Look, smoke marijuana or don't. Hate it, don't. Listen to String Cheese Incident, don't. Regardless how you feel about weed, the facts are these. The criminalization of marijuana in Minnesota wastes the state and taxpayer money and actively contributes to racial discrimination in our justice system. And the String Cheese Incident is masturbatory at best. When weed is eventually legalized in Minnesota, it will not just be an occasion to hit the kind bud and get crazy lifted, and for Hollywood to finally remake Dude, Where's My Car. It will also be a time when Minnesotans can rest a little bit easier because they will no longer fear ineffective laws that discriminate against them. And then, maybe, just maybe, Cousin Corey's Everywhere will finally shut the fuck up. Thank you. Good night, Minnesota.
Tune in, Minnesota tonight. Minnesota tonight. Tune in tonight. Minnesota tonight. Minnesota tonight. Yeah.
Tonight's interview guest is the former executive director of the Minnesota chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws and current advocate for the reform of marijuana laws. Please welcome Marcus Harcus. Marcus, thank you so much for being on the show. That was the most successful interracial pound since the 70s. It's not what you think. So Marcus, before we start...
That should be a new intro.
That's our new intro.
Interracial pounds.
Okay. So Marcus, but before we start, can you just tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get involved with this issue in particular?
Okay, so I've been an organizer since I was in high school. Worked on a variety of social justice issues. I've also smoked cannabis since I was 20. I'll be 38.
I couldn't tell by your pin.
You can tell by my belly.
Wait, is that a thing? Is it like, I'm not going to look
it's
at it.
It's an appetite stimulant, you know.
Okay.
But when the states of Washington and Colorado legalized it, a light came on, like ding, 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 like this is something that should happen here. You know, I've just been creeping around all these years.
You've been just what? We're on camera, I'm reminding you, we're on camera, my friend.
No, just trying not to be harassed by police more than I already am, you know. Mm-hmm. So a friend of mine got a job with Minnesota NORML, and then he brought me in as like a guest trainer. And then I spoke at their Capitol rally. Then he got fired, and then I got hired. And then I advocated for full legalization of cannabis for the past year and a half.
Did your friend get fired because he was smoking on the job, or is that encouraged?
Oh, it wasn't. I smoked during my interview for that job.
Oh, wow. That shows your chops. You were, like, they do a drug test, but then you have to test positive, otherwise you're not hired.
Yeah,
okay, well,
myself.
You prove yourself. It's like, yeah,
I've got
gauntlet.
tolerance.
Yeah. Yeah, I smoked during my interview for this job, too. Still hired. Amazing. Amazing. I was the only candidate, too, so.
Just to show you how functional you can be.
Should we do a fitness test, or are you going to do an agility challenge?
No, I mean mentally, you know.
Oh, okay, cool. So you mentioned Washington and Colorado, two states that have legalized recreational use of marijuana. Minnesota has legalized a
in some way the medical use of marijuana by specific patients. Do you think that has changed anything, or the attitudes around marijuana in Minnesota specifically?
I mean, the majority of people, over 76% of the people supports medical, but we did a public opinion poll last year, and 49% of the state supports full legalization. So there's this group we call the marijuana middle, the people who support medical but not personal use. And so we've got a ways to go.
And so what do you think will change their attitudes around that? Or
I mean, we need a lot of strategic public education, because there's a lot of ignorance out there. There's, 79 years of reefer madness, out there, especially
it's a long movie.
People. I haven't been able to watch it.
So what's the one thing that you want people to know, or you think that is the biggest misconception that you're trying to change?
I mean, cannabis is not dangerous, but prohibition is. I mean, cannabis doesn't heal anyone. It's not for everyone, but it's for, tens of millions of Americans use it, and it increases people's quality of life. I mean, people try to distinguish between medical use and personal use, what, the government calls recreational, which kind of feeds into the stigma. But everyone who uses it, without abusing it, and most people who do use it don't abuse it, there's a distinction, get some type of medical benefit from it, Everyone who uses it will relax. Like you mentioned violence earlier, there's probably a lot of violence that has been prevented from people smoking.
Well,
calms them down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so, I mean, a lot of the criticism against this is that, marijuana is a gateway drug to other drugs.
There's no science to prove that. That's actually nonsense. If you talk to real, like neuroscientists or drug addiction researchers, there's no evidence to prove that. That's a bunch of government propaganda.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, it's a bunch of lies. It's BS.
BS? Huh. Yeah. Okay. So, to counter those lies, what have you as an advocate done to try to educate people, or what can people do if they want to advocate for the change of these laws?
Well, first of all, we need people who are consumers to speak up. I mean, there's the unfortunate thing is that some of the people who have like the most power, who could be the most influential, won't speak out.
Who are those people?
There's pharmacists, there's politicians, there's lawyers, there's probably judges, there's probably police who consume it privately, but they'll never, publicly say they do.
They'll never smoke during an interview, and that's ridiculous.
I mean, I had an assistant county attorney who lost his job over having 2.3 grams in his car, So there's a lot of powerful people that consume it. Every kind of person imaginable smokes weed. I mean, it's a minority of the population, but a lot of people do it. If 10 to 15% of the state does it, we probably have a couple 100,000 people creeping around.
Still creeping
afraid
around.
to get pulled over and harassed,
Right. So do you feel like you'll see the day when Minnesota legalizes recreational use of marijuana?
Yeah, but it may not be anytime soon.
Why is that?
Well, because half of the states are initiative states where the citizens can, identify an issue and gather a bunch of signatures enough to qualify to put the issue on the ballot for the voters to decide. Minnesota is not an initiative state.
Oh, wow.
So the only way we're going to get it done is if our legislators do it on their own, which you shouldn't count on that in the next 30, 40 years. Or if they were to put the question on the ballot for the voters to decide, they could propose a constitutional amendment, and then we would get the chance to vote yes or no to legalize.
And so there would be a specific clause in Minnesota's constitution about weed.
I mean, that's the most viable way for us to get it anytime soon, is through a constitutional amendment.
Wow. That would be every 16-year-old stoner's dream. Why don't we just amend the Constitution, man?
I mean, that's what they did in Colorado.
Oh.
Amendment 64.
Amendment 64.
Yeah. Measure 91 in Oregon.
They didn't just bump up the amount of amendments for
Washington State.
They didn't bump up the amendments to just 420 just for the sake of it.
Nah, I'm going to be in Portland, Oregon on 420.
What, you want to be where?
Portland, Oregon.
Oh, Portland, Oregon. Sorry, I've never been there.
Yeah, you should go.
I should. Well,
It's kind of like Minneapolis, except weed is not a big deal out there.
so it's a less of a big deal once it's legalized?
I mean, in those states, it already wasn't a big deal for most of the people.
Word.
And it's really not a big deal now.
Yeah. Yeah. People just don't care anymore. No one smokes.
It doesn't really hurt anyone.
Cool. Well, hopefully.
I mean, most people. It has like a 9% addiction rate, lower than coffee. Yeah.
And so, hopefully, is coffee legalized in Minnesota?
Coffee's legal.
Oh, okay.
Drink
So,
coffee.
I don't drink coffee during an interview, but I do it privately. So no. Marcus Harcus, former director of the National Organization for Reform Marijuana Laws. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Minnesota tonight. Tune in. Minnesota tonight. Tune in. Minnesota tonight. Tune in. Minnesota tonight. Tune in. Minnesota. Tune in. Minnesota tonight. Tune in. Minnesota tonight. Tonight. Minnesota tonight. Tonight. Minnesota tonight. Minnesota tonight.